Um, Morning, everyone. Whew. I'm good, thanks. I've been a bit kind of stressed out because I'm not really sure where to begin about my project. It's really multifaceted, and like to kind of zone it down to a few thoughts. Was quite a tricky task. So please just bear with me if my thoughts are all over the place. I will try and circle back as quickly and as concisely as possible. So where do I begin? I guess I shall begin at the beginning. No pun intended. Right, so Thoughts on a Sunday Playlist is part of my master's project that engages in the township of Thokoza, about 30 to 40-minute drive outside of the Witwatersrand region. And just to kind of give you a sense of my kind of work in really trying to extrapolate some notes, some thoughts, some ruminations, propositions, etc., about how to really kind of engage in a very kind of large question, like how to engage as an artist with a township visually, and like just try to kind of trace the aesthetic relations that this particular township kind of really happens. And one of the kind of like first things that I really wanted to do, so I was born in 1993, and in between 1989 to 1993, roughly, there were some incredibly violent kind of socio-political, what I call like geo-transportational, as well as like psychosocial kind of like violence. Lots of houses were torched. Lots of like ethnic kind of battles that exploded, like from really kind of like taxi violence between, or like taxi disputes between two people that ended up expanding into a kind of national kind of battle between ANC and IFP kind of members. Hostel dwellers on the one side, in Mshayzafe hostel, and on the other side, in Pola Park, ANC supporters. And so one of the really kind of terrifying things upon kind of like asking around, particularly in my family, was that my parents' house, and by extension where I was kind of living in, that I was born into really, is literally in between these two places. And so kind of like we were almost quite literally in like the crossfire. And so not really knowing where to start, the kind of less obvious thing was to start with music, and in particular kind of really kind of engaging the kind of like a kind of Sunday playlist. And like for those of you in a kind of contemporary sense, like the Sunday playlist is, if you tune on to the radio, 702 with Non-Bota, Lesedi FM with DJ Squeezabell, I can't remember, like it is on there's a particular kind of genre of music that's been played on a Sunday, roughly like in the afternoons, like so from like about like 9 a.m. to about 3 a.m. And usually like one of the things that I really kind of picked up on this was that they were almost kind of relating messages about kind of like structures of love, relationships, sometimes maybe tragedy, treachery, life lessons in a sense. And and I really kind of thought about kind of sound as a kind of like larger like format for engaging in these like in these ideas and in these kind of like idea networks particularly. And so kind of really thinking about this kind of relationship between like the township as a place, like as a kind of like colonial kind of invention, almost, because as we all know, like in relation to, I just want to have a look at my notes here. The creation, so just to kind of like work like our way back, the kind of creation of the township was in fact kind of working from the 1913 Land Act number 27, of course, which then essentially like separated like immense kind of like portions of land and only apportioned like very kind of like small quantities of land to black and natives in a sense in like the early like 20th century, and kind of drawing from Saul Blakey's thought in his text Native Land, an Essay, where he kind of states that on the 20th of June 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave but a pariah in the land of his birth, and really kind of engaging in this kind of like multiplicitous idea of place and how kind of music tends to either connect or disconnect or kind of function out of that space. I'll try to be as concise as possible. This archive actually exists online as we speak, and I invite you to come with me as we take a walk through the township as per Stimela's engagement. And so kind of really thinking about the black spot, or like the kind of colonial invention of the black spot, and really kind of being interested in thinking about the architecture of the township, particularly from a very kind of like philosophical and a conceptual point of view. I really kind of found that it's a very useful place to start thinking about the township, not necessarily as a township only, and not as a colonial invention only, but as, well, not in fact as a black spot only, but a place through which multiple things can happen, particularly on like the body, on the mind, on the ear, and on the senses. And so then I really kind of thought about like the circle or the dot in the kind of dance vernacular as a place of community building, of sharing, which is then in the vernacular kind of treated as kospodong, which is the spot, like the place at which all things are happening. And to really kind of think through this idea, I really kind of wanted to think about a place in which sound, the sonic, I wanted to think about kospodong, or like the place at which things happen, as a place where sound, the sonic, sound theory and noise really correlate, and really kind of wanting to really kind of think about like sound and place both as places, but also sound and place both as places. I will extrapolate like on this idea further, because it is a really kind of complex formulation. And what I really kind of wanted to think about is, or really kind of wanting to propose is, can the sonic, and like what I mean by the sonic is the kind of rhythm of the sound, the kind of tempo of the sound that's played vis-a-vis the sonic playlist, and like that's, and like kind of thinking and existing in the kind of Sunday playlist, in the kind of Sunday routine, as a kind of decolonial framework for being able to move in and out of the township as a very kind of solid place that's physically built with sand and stone, and really kind of thinking about sound as a kind of decolonial option to really start to get the mind kind of wandering outside of that, outside of the colonial invention. So if you think about the colonial invention as a building, then sound is essentially like our feet carrying, or like us kind of like walking out of the kind of colonial plan, essentially. Cool. Done. And so kind of really wanting to, again, thinking about like the place where kind of like sound thoughts collate, like how then can we then begin to really start to build or to kind of like reconstruct the kind of township using the sonic and the lyrics in the sonic vis-a-vis the poetry, and then as a kind of larger question about language and the structures of language and how we can then begin to almost reconstruct a dialect using the kind of language of the black spot, of the spot as place, place as dot, and then really begin to kind of thinking about scale, being able to really kind of think about rezoning these lyrics. How can we figure out ways to extrapolate what the artists, what the musicians are saying? So like what's Letambuli saying, like what are the relations between, bless you, Letambuli's Noche Tuhuru to the sounds of Mparanyane, to the sounds of Roy Ayers, like in the States, right? And so like, again, the kind of sonic then kind of becomes a kind of tactic for us to really start like re-engaging in the township. And when we kind of start to think about the township as a kind of sonic landscape, then what tends to happen is that not only does the sonic become an important kind of methodological framework in thinking about like our kind of conceptual places or zones or movements, but then also what we then tend to see in the hood particularly. And like my parents had shared the story with me, is that usually like every single Sunday, the speaker itself, like not the body speaker, but like the music speakers, like everyone would take the speakers outside of the house and play like this kind of same kind of genre of music. And again, like in playing the same genre of so like when multiple houses play the same genre of music, the block itself then becomes this place where like messages then start to kind of like emanate like from this place, and then at the same time kind of building a kind of like sonic map. So if we had to kind of map out so let me think about this. So if like the block then becomes this hotspot of messages, these this kind of hotspot where these lyrics and the meanings of these lyrics kind of come together, then what then happens to the listener is that the body itself then becomes the kind of like receiving of these messages, and like really kind of, again, like what I'm really kind of curious about in this practice is the position of like the body itself, right? So like because sound doesn't really exist in the visual, like in the visual field, right? It doesn't necessarily affect the eyes, but it really affects kind of the ears, and so like the ears become a kind of place where all of Mhlonishwa was talking about memory work. So the memory work in this sense was really kind of really actually just like works in the ear and not necessarily like from speech or from the eyes. And like really kind of this place kind of really becoming like a kind of get together and a kind of re-territorialization of the colonial project, and like reworking that into a different kind of direction for me is quite fundamental. But then even to really start to really kind of thinking about ways of how we can actually begin to reconstruct the homes and the messages, and therefore the ideological structures and the social structures through which we build our lives upon. And with that, I would like to leave you with Sade's brilliantly sensual poetry. In her song Feel No Pain, and she says, well, like the band actually says, don't let them stay home and listen to the blues, the colonial blues. That's me. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Yeah. Thank you for staying. And for sure, my name is Mhlonishwa Chiliza. So Londi forgot to tell you that I'm 32 years old. And again, thank you for those who arranged this conference together. And the title is very interesting, or the theme. There was no way I could not participate in this. It's very inviting. Yeah. So my presentation, so the key term is Kuyahlangana. So it is important to theorize ukuhlanganisa, because it helps me to look and reflect at a townships-scape creatively. Kuyahlangana kodwa is a metaphorical question statement that comes mostly in moments of social interactions, and it calls for a brief conversation. So generally, the dialogues invoke oral histories and narratives that unpack the current political complexities that we are facing as South Africans. Therefore, in my day-to-day engagement with informal settlements, such as shacks and hostels that are within South African landscapes, I witness different forms of crimes, violence, drug abuse, and it is where most people live through a survivalist mode of ukuhlanganisa. Ukuhlanganisa, which means constructing or putting something together or putting things together. So, which further means doing whatever it takes to make ends meet. So these realities of social and political structures reveal that past brutal experiences of apartheid, forced removals, massive land dispossession, and continued poverty are still prevailing in the present. And these historical repressive policies determine how people interact and move through spaces today. Therefore, in my grappling with this question of Kuyahlangana kodwa, I try to negotiate for new narratives and meanings within the social sphere of Black lives. And this mode of theorizing and dialoguing in this scholarly journey informs my ways of seeing and interpreting, as well as exploring new ways of constructing knowledge. So in my introduction, so the title is being influenced by my position as a researcher, artist, as well as an interpreter. And the explicit framing of narratives is informed by my experiential knowledge of the socio-political dynamics of township life. My engagement with these spaces, shacks and hostels, I embark on a practice of studying visual materials, and I try to make meaning out of them. In employing my aesthetic sensibilities, I tend to make notes, make sketches, and generate photographs using my cell phone. I acknowledge this form of practice as my intellectual artistic invention because these visual adaptable materials inspire my current body of work, where I explore with photography and sculpture installation. And the overview of a township, so the history does applaud township communities for their participation during the events of liberation struggles against apartheid regime. So, and according to Sikori's perspective on township experience, he offers a broad rationale that South African townships are among the most layered and important spaces in the country, politically, economically, and culturally. As a place, the township is imbued with historical symbolism, memorized through events like the 1976 students' protest in Soweto, the Sharpeville massacre of the 1960s, the displacement of District 6, etc. And this is part of our general knowledge that townships were usually built in the peripheries of towns and cities. And this is one of the most important artworks within the contemporary art discourse in South Africa, as in reality, the work gives a clear indication of where we come from as a nation. And Andries Water Oliphant's essay framed the work within the post-colonial South Africa under the theme of art as an agent of change. This is how he unpacks the work. So he says that Mokoena's reconstruction is a treasure of key moments in South Africa's trajectory of change, both in recent times and over a long period. This triptych is not just a reflection of change, but also a visualization of a set of interrelated ideas constructed from the debris of a changing society. It is a distinctive part of that rapidly expanding community of images of contemporary South African art. The first mailbag has attached to it an image of a devastated environment. The second supports a replica of a newly built house in a collage painted on wood fragments. The third displays a new South African flag painted on wood, with another script inscribed with African iconography below. At an aesthetic level, the three postal bags represent three distinctive stages of our visual history: traditional painting, collage and assemblage. And on a thematic level, they also represent three epochs of South African history: conflicts and destruction, reconstruction, and national liberation. So in these current slides, I'm also looking at Kuyahlangana being similar to a social practice of gambling. It is quite ironic that these gambling boards are mostly elevated on public concrete beams and also on a steel table frame of a school furniture, and this begins to raise questions about the system of our education in South Africa. So looking at Kuyahlangana within our socio-cultural spheres, Kuyahlangana in literal terms could mean to construct something. And a good example of Kuyahlangana or making ends meet is when in the early mornings you pass vendors in the street constructing tents to sell some products so that they can put bread on the table. The uniformity of this activity could be performative and being metaphoric to the construction of life in a day-to-day basis. In these moments of encounter, I see vending tents or shelters being assembled, and later when the sun goes down, it is being disassembled or deinstalled. And these practices speak precisely to the kind of culture, language, and lifestyles of ups and downs within these spaces. And another phrase could be Kuyahlangana, means that life is going sideways. And this term has multiple meanings because it is also acknowledging that one is attempting to find consistency and financial stability. As much as these terms are a mirror of our socio-cultural landscape in this new dispensation, I still recommend a critical reviewing because they influence poor black communities to accept hardships and low standards of living. And at the same time, these terms can also bring a sense of comfort that things one day will come together. Yeah, this is just a close-up, and this is an image that was generated by a famous photographer, Greg Marinovich, around 2007. And in these current slides, I'm looking at the everydayness, events, life, and stories. Time, space, relationality, and temporality. So this picture was taken in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, T17 section hostel. And this photograph, I took it using my cell phone, and it was generated 2 weeks later after looting. And this cannot leave my memory when Ubaba Mzobe pulled me aside and shared a personal story to me, explaining how devastated he is because his 3 sons have passed on, and the cause of death is fire. He burst into tears while explaining that this looting is now intertwined with other criminal acts. He requested that I assist him where I can because he believed that if he finds the truth and justice is served accordingly, their souls will rest in peace. We generated the image together with the victim as a one step forward to solve the problem. And the main aim was to be in touch with the local journalists so that they can distribute the story with the hope that perpetrators will be caught. And without exposing any further details because of ethics, I look at the image again. I try to decode this image, and I observe that the man is at the age of my father. And this clearly illustrates that Ubaba Mzobe is from the generation that lived during the times of apartheid. The quotes within the image are obvious, especially the logo of a well-known political party in South Africa, which is Inkatha Freedom Party. And because of the site in which the image is taken in my subconscious, it still registers that townships and hostels have been and are still hostile environments or theaters of violence. And the tears of this man, who was not afraid to cry in my presence, could signify that, look now, history is repeating itself. And these big traumatic histories or traumatic threads are being carried through or are being interwoven in the present. So in this context, Simpempe is a symbol of agency. It is a powerful symbol that is still used today inside and outside hostels, township and outside townships, to report maybe internal emergencies, or it could either be cultural activities, marches, or political campaigns. The initial aim to throw this object, so I also generated this series of drawings during the times of looting where we could not move. Transport was unavailable, so I was busy in the room drawing. So the initial aim to draw these objects was a meditative process that is in response to the crisis of space, adequate service delivery, and the question of land. I was not only limited to think about the problems of space inside the hostels, as these key problems extend to touch on the politics of space in South Africa at large. As an extension to the issue of land and space, shacks keep popping up in most parts of South African landscapes, and this new culture of shack-dwelling community is growing rapidly. Shacks are vulnerable and risky. They have so much danger to human life. And reflecting on my position in hostels and townships, there are moments where my appearance in these spaces changes or impacts the social setting. I could become a mentor, a teacher, a leader, or a brother to others. And while valuing these daily social interactions, I do not take for granted the interrelationships of stories and events within the space. And that is when, during this moment when I was generating this photograph, I found myself being updated about this one-night incident of our neighbor, Busi, who died in a shack that went up in flames because she fell asleep while she was cooking. The shack was burnt down to its last detail, and a few days later, after her body and spirit was collected, a newly built structure of a shack was erected on top of that site for a new immigrant to occupy. This act does not only speak to the inhumanness in that space, but metaphorically it could speak to the discrepancies of our democracy. And that discrepancies could start from the resurfacing of police brutality and massacres, and also the rebuilding processes that are unstable as they overlap the unhealed wounds of apartheid. Possible interventions. Despite the complexities, blacks have always navigated ways to create beautiful lives for themselves. And this new series of photographs is an important body of work within our visual and social history, as it speaks to the recording of the time. Because now we'll know that COVID really existed. And I'll try to unpack or give a rationale behind these works, which was inspired by seeing the plastics on washing lines, both in townships and hostels. So I'll just give an insider experience when I was looking at the landscape of Umlazi Township Hostel. So as I walk around inside my hostel, I encounter plastics hanging on a washing line or washing lines. The visibility of plastics is an alert of the presence of COVID-19 pandemic that we have a responsibility to fight through steaming, which is believed to limit the chances of getting infected. Steaming is also called ukugquma. So ukugquma is a historical practice amongst black communities and in hostels and townships. It is a common ritual that is integrated to the social cultures of the space, and plastics are used to wrap the bodies. The alternative of a plastic could be a blanket. So relating ukugquma with African spirituality using traditional herbs, it is mainly used for healing, cleansing your aura to remove bad luck for the sake of attracting good energy, unlocking life opportunities and progress. Steaming is a painful process, but on a positive note, it is a temporal moment of engaging with the self in that personal secret space of praying to connect with the higher ancestral powers and God to manifest desires. The process of ukugquma is painful and suffocating. It reflects how I feel during my stays inside the hostel block. The hostels are congested, uninviting, temporal. They are similar to ukugquma. Despite the complexities of violence, poverty, and high unemployment rate, I also acknowledge the sides of the fact that hostels can also allow for progress, failure, the crafting of wayward practices such as refusal and fugitivity, which include the exploring of life opportunities, self-determination, and the recreation of freedom. And this is the last quote that I've seen from the book of Santu Mufukeng, which gives an explanation that blacks have always been in a struggle of chasing shadows. And I quite like the quote of which I discovered in the front page of that book, which is kind of like integrated or relating to my framework or to my current practice. And in closing, this is where my last or newly constructed structure of a building that resembles an RDP house is inspired by. And thank you.
Any questions, any responses, anyone?
Yeah, I think the pairing of both of you to get, for this panel is really amazing. To see sort of young scholars theorizing from the epicenters of their location is just phenomenal. I'm sure from the very first time I've encountered you it's amazing how you use both your experiences in hostels and townships, but also the ways in which you use Zulu to theorize. And I think for me that sets you apart from so many scholars, or students even, because there's a serious thinking through, you might start being inspired by some term that you've heard or some theory that you've experienced that's international, but the way you then take that and you actually find the kind of equivalencies or even differences in local context is something that makes it entirely you. And I just think you have an amazing future as a theorist, as a creative theorist. And I'm really loving the whole steaming works and thinking through how this idea of the tension between being able to move out and have aspirations, and also that tension between being stuck and not being able to move and being suffocated. How those of us who came from townships, how we can all relate to that. And I mean, Pebo, I just love everything about the Eddie Zondi homage, you know, because I don't think any musician DJ has captured our attention, even with Bob Mabena's recent passing, and people, you know, giving big ups to Bob Mabena. It's not the same as was the outpouring for Eddie Zondi after he passed away, you know. There was a national SABC tribute to Eddie Zondi. And I don't think scholarship has really tied Eddie Zondi to the kinds of identities that we have, and what DJs have meant and music has meant in that kind of way. So it's the playlist itself is incredible. So go and hear the playlist. But just the ways again in which you're kind of theorizing from the black hotspot is really phenomenal for me. No questions there.
Just want to share an observation and a short question. So what I find amazing is how the conversation of the sonic actually spans also from Mhlonishwa's keynote to your work, Pebo. So the sonic is transgressive, it's bleeding, leaking, it's everything uncontainable, because the sonic, as we see here, is always kind of overlapping. So it speaks to the multi-layered. So I want to ask you actually so how is Mhlonishwa, because I saw in your sketch, I was really amazed by the words that you kind of mapped in the house. And so how do you see these kind of words echoing as a space, inside and outside, blurring the inside and outside? And then alternatively to Pebofatso, how do you speak in your practice to the bricolage that appears in? So I want to kind of ask you cross-practically, how do you speak to each other? See if it makes sense.
So if I'm trying to understand your question pertaining to the sketch. So I had a lot to think about when I had to kind of like develop a sculpture installation around the sketch, because if you can check, the sketch developed and transformed into an actual structure, and there are no words, because the practice itself is private. It's almost like a prayer. If you're praying, it's between you and God. A person from outside or a person next to you is not supposed to hear or find out about your yearnings or find out about your crisis and stuff. So it's a very interesting question, because it relates to my conclusion of deciding not to put these terms within the actual structure, because these are private moments.
I would actually like to actually kind of start from the kind of idea of putting things together, right? Who kopansa, vis-a-vis Kuyahlangana. But I was really kind of thinking about like putting things together as a kind of like it's an actual it's, to me at least, like there's a very specific logic at work. It's not random, right? And by it kind of having this kind of method, it means that like there is like some kind of design logic at work. And I'm really kind of, and I think it's really useful and in fact really critical to start thinking about like Kuyahlangana, particularly as a design framework in relation to what's actually happening in the township, because like not only do you have like there's a kind of calculus here at play as well, because it's got to do with what others have in relation to what others don't have, and so kind of taking one object here and a second kind of one object here, it's a 1 + 1, and then like the question then becomes how do you put them together as a kind of design, like as a kind of like a more like improvised like social design practice. I think like that's kind of where that's I think where the possibilities reside. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Alright. Any more questions, responses? Yes, Tano?
Great work, guys. It's really nice to see this work. And I wanted to raise a point of, it's really interesting how with images of the township, it's super synonymous with struggle always. And having that idea, like with your work, Mhlonishwa, when you were speaking about Kuyahlangana, it's always interesting when I think about that. When people talk about Kuyahlangana, it's always a continuous thing. You're working towards something to sort of like make life better for yourself in the township. And almost everyone in the township sort of yearns for this escape from the township. So that sort of gives this notion that as much as the township is whole, it's not really, it doesn't really belong to anyone in a way. It's a space where people are put, and being put there forces you to sort of uhlanganise, because you have to make ends meet in that sense. So yeah. And then looking at your work, Pebofatso, with the music, it then speaks to this notion of people finding their own space in the township. So the use of music, it's sort of like this comforting thing for people. So on a Sunday, you know that Sunday is the day to relax, clean, and be nice. So yeah, within that space of a township where the struggle is constant, on a Sunday you know that now we're relaxing now. So yeah, for me it just made me think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Any last responses? One last? Oh, Toby. Okay.
Sorry, I just want to be able to see. Thank you so much, guys, for your presentation. I would like to maybe speak a little bit about the notion of Kuyahlangana. And I think for me, it's kind of, I felt like it's interrogating this notion of arriving as a greeting, like as you greet somebody, Kuyahlangana kodwa, but it's like, are you arriving at this kind of ideal destination of success, ideal destination of, being an accomplished person, or as even our brother was sharing, like escaping the struggle. And I see that it's something that kind of follows you even when you now have sort of escaped the space or its struggle, and it's still a thing, because I'll be in like any random space, as long as there's a black person, they will always ask when they greet me, Kuyahlangana kodwa? And they ask this in relation to so many things, whether it's my master's, is it Hlangane? They're always asking me this question. And it makes me so anxious when somebody asks me that question, because I know what they're asking me. They are asking me, have I arrived? Have I become something? Have I, have I proved my existence is worth, So I think I really love that you're interrogating those notions and the way people are conversing nowadays. Because I don't know what happened to hello, how are you? Why? Because I feel it's such an intrusive question. It doesn't give you a space to actually, because it's not really a greeting, even though it is a greeting, and we've just normalized this kind of. So I really love that you exploring those things. Both of you actually, the township life, it's the good and the bad of it, because I would not want to entirely demonize the township, because there is good in the experiences, in the sense of community, in the sense of culture, because township is so rich. It is not just a dumping ground for black bodies, So I really appreciate that you guys are actually exploring every dimension of the township, every dimension of people who are in the township, their struggles, their successes, and their definition of what actually success is. Because umntu ohlala ku township, the success kuye. It's some people is like tikitile. I've got my sorry, not sorry. Tikitile is like if I'm affording these types of clothes, I've got my not even Ivurpa. What's that classic BMW? You see, this urban life is not good. Now you're forgetting important things. There's so much. And even as Charlene was commenting as well about the music, and there's so much richness. And so I really appreciate that you're just exploring all of it, interrogating it equally, because there are violences in the spaces. As you were sharing about the woman who died, next thing, I'm like, whoa, that is so hectic. How do you have somebody die in a shack, and then next week it's like nothing happened? We are just building on top of that, and there's no kind of remembrance of that person in that space, that somebody actually lived here and died here in this condition. So I think I appreciate the kind of interrogations that you guys are both making. Yeah, it's really thought-provoking, and yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can I just say, I think that's why Generations, the first TV show Generations was such a hit, right? Because not only did it speak to a kind of like aspiration, but also a kind of nostalgia, right? Because at the same time, Generations happens on TV, and you need to be in a place to watch that aspiration every day. It became the news, and so every single day you'd watch people, fictional characters, by the way, up the ladder, but then in the meantime, but there's it's hard to see the same infrastructure, right? But then also again, if you this kind of notion of escape, to me really kind of or theoretically kind of speak to a kind of the notion of black social death, right? Where it's people are it's there's this kind of place where people are consistently trying to escape from, and it's just it's not really the thing. It's in fact the place where people do actually connect things that other people don't see, right? That then spark life, and then life kind of works, or life starts from that place of social death. Again, Lisa was really talking about a place of death being in fact the place of life again, and I'm really kind of, and that idea really kind of is really, really important in kind of allowing the township itself to start breathing life outward, as opposed to kind of things being dumped onto the township. I think that's really where the potency lies. Sorry if I'm a bit too deep.
To respond to what you just said, this breathing out of new life, I feel it's happening more and more now, because the township is a place of mixed cultures, and as those cultures mix and integrate, something new forms, and that life that is played out is then sent out to these other places, and these other places also take up this life. So yeah, this breathing of new life is sort of key. Makes me think of, I was watching Final Destination, and then they were like, the only way to defeat death is through new life.
Right.
So it's like that with this notion of the township. Something new, I would say, is sort of forming, where different people, I'd say, different people are coming out, and they are, they basically rewriting their own story.
But I just want to say thank you first, and to Mhlonishwa. I think what I got was kind of the violence of the temporary, which then Mandla kind of touched on, which about like this building on top of someone, essentially, and kind of how, what you were saying about the structuring of the Land Act, and how that's kind of led us now to this, to just that phrase, this kind of the violence of the temporary, that like, because actually, so like in the book, so like he talks about, actually it's a quote from the white men who are trying to take the land, and they're chatting about how they're struggling to evict the black people off the land, and how they've rent-racked them, and they've like tried all these methods, but it's even the smallest piece of land has been fought for like to the death, and I think it's kind of, it's that thing of like, you can't, like Mutanda was saying, there's no one who really can claim it, and because of that, there's this up in the air thing, this ball that sometimes hits the ground and it explodes in everyone's face, kind of a thing. And then I was very interested as like Spotong as a portal, actually, because there is something very transcendent about it. I'm remembering Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace in the church, and kind of being a million years ago, like 9 years ago, there was this place down the road, Spotong actually, and kind of my first experience, I don't know if it moved, but my first experience in there was like in grade 11 or something, and finding again now in Aretha this church-like union that kind of happened in the spot, and going, oh, okay, there's a transcendence, there's a kind of a portal that opens in these places. But I don't know where this is going, but I would be remiss to not point out also then like how we struggle to negotiate those spaces. So for instance, recently with like 24 kids, in this transcendental space, and like then how do we protect the space, how do we protect the people around these spaces, and because it is, something's happening, something really is happening, and I think it's coming from the acknowledgement like from you, but like what Charlene was saying about like taking the time to really acknowledge Edison seriously, and going, dog, what is the word that starts with the C? Our canon, right, is greatly informed by but yeah, thank you.
Hello, I think it's quite interesting that you're working with music, but it also comes back, I think, to what he said, esportini on a Sunday, meaning there should be, you get a certain type of music, the R&B that is played, and just not only a Katorase, but all the townships, it's like almost a similar setup. And it was also interesting that you mentioned Wendizoni, because they used to do the township tour, where they would go to townships and bring love on a Sunday. And you'll only find it in the townships, because you'll phone friends, it's like, oh, yo, Wendizoni is coming. And everybody will be, gathering there. But on the same note, within the pain and the hurt, there was love, there was beauty, there was laughter. And you try to take positiveness from that situation, because sometimes you don't dwell in negativity, you just continue moving on. And it's another way of saying, yes, it doesn't mean we didn't go through trauma. Everyday life continues. It doesn't stand still because we are hurting, we are going through certain things. And another thing we spoke about, each household as well, playing this music loud. Everybody's like competing with each other. Because I've got the biggest speakers that of this romantic music that you get in the township, and you drive, or sometimes you're all listening to the same radio station. So as you drive along, whichever road, you could hear, okay, everybody has a loudspeaker, you just continue. So it's kind of like memories, of every township. And then when it comes to Mhlonishwa, I think it was quite interesting, the whistle, how you painted the whistle, because it played such a significant role, especially in the apartheid years. I grew up in that time frame. When you hear a whistle coming from in the Val, it's like a whistle, meaning watch out, there they come. So how it evolves with the times and the relevance of a whistle as well. So I think, for me it was quite interesting, the significance of a whistle. We use it now for sports, but the meaning of it those years, it carried a very significant,
We're speaking a lot about the kinds of aspirational lives that we live when we come from these kinds of spaces, right? And so everybody has these aspirations, I'm guessing, or maybe not everybody, but most people have aspirations of moving out of the township. But then when people do finally move out, they carry with them the guilt of having moved out. And then now how do you speak to the space, and how do you theorize around the space, and how do you make art around that space? And suddenly, even though you lived there for 25 years, you're now living, you're now living in a suburb in Auckland Park. I'm not talking to anybody in particular. Suddenly now you can't speak about the township because now you're not authentic because you don't live there. And I understand the thing about how spaces evolve, even though they don't seem to evolve, they do evolve, and they're constantly evolving, so that you might not be up to date with the kinds of developments that are happening in a space if you're not from that space. But I think there's interesting tensions for scholars, for artists, for people who are thinking through the kinds of spaces that they came up from, how one deals with that. And maybe my question then to both of you is how do you negotiate the space of being here at Wits and a fine art student, and now we're all listening to you like the experts that you all are, and then you go back to the spaces that's home and not home but home. So how do you negotiate that?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, right? I don't know. I really don't know, and I can't provide an answer, like a solid answer. I just can't. It's a very partial thing. Just let me know if we're running over time.
You also like me, but go ahead.
I think I don't know. I really don't know. I can't. Yeah, I would need some time to really think about that one.
Yeah, for me it's a tricky question because there is a saying that a township will never leave you or a hostel will never leave you. For example, if I'm being invited to visit in a suburb, I know that those elements will pop through that will kind of like show my backgrounds. Because at home, I remember I went to a point where I'm matriculating and we were always fighting with my mother because every morning we have to fix the bed. And I'm not sure, maybe if I was lazy to kind of like engage in that activity. But in a hostel, it's much more free because there are no parents. No one is standing behind you, making sure that the bed is being made properly. I'm a very busy person. I don't really get time to fix the bed. And then, secondly, my father spent his lifetime in a hostel. And also, when I was an undergrad student in Durban, hostel dwellers or the hostel community, including my family at home in the rural homelands, they contributed a lot in the development, especially the developments in my studies. So there is no way I can remove myself in the space and being unable to integrate myself in the space again, because those people have played a pivotal role for me to develop. I think maybe it's based from the spirit of Ubuntu. So I still see myself as 100% belonging in that space or in those spaces. Similar when I go at home, there is no way, like there is this saying, I think it still applies to most of us. Even you, Prof. Khan, you are in your 40s, I think. But yeah, you are still in your 40s. But if your parents will still be around, they'll still refer you as their child. So it doesn't change. So that's my perspective.
Thank you.